I started making a list of all the things that I wanted, and I didn't worry about time or money or the how component. I just concentrated on the what. I just concentrated on what do I want. And some days I would just put one word in there, I'd maybe empower or maybe strength or something. And the list kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so that would be my advice, is don't worry about the how, concentrate on that what, because of that list, because of that now gigantic list that started from one word, I have my own business.
You're listening to The Creative Impostor, episode number 38. Welcome to The Creative Impostor. I'm Andrea Klunder, and today I'm trying something new. Did you expect anything less from me? If you've been listening to The Creative Impostor from day one, sometime in 2015, then A, you are my hero. Huzzah! Seriously, thank you. And B, you've heard a version of this episode before. That's episode number 2 with Nikki Nigl. And you can skip directly to thecreativeimpostor.com/magic. Linked in the show notes if you tap the artwork on this episode in your Apple Podcasts app, or possibly in other apps too, not sure. And there, you can get started on my How to Start Anything audio course to help you start whatever creative project or endeavor you need help starting or restarting if you've gotten stuck. Got it? Just do it. And if you have never listened to my interview with Nikki Nigl in episode 2, or if you can't remember the brilliant words of wisdom from the lips of this dynamic women's empowerment coach, see what she did there, then stay tuned. I have re-edited our conversation to include the most relevant, most engaging, most entertaining bits of our talk for you. And I have to say, it's pretty interesting to go back and listen to one of my early interviews and see how much everything has changed and grown and improved about the way I interview and the way I edit. Back then, I really had no idea what I was doing, and I felt like a total imposter when I interviewed Nikki because actually we had never even met in real life. I had been cyberstalking her in the most benevolent way because I had caught sight of this event series that she produces called About Women through mutual Facebook friends, and it looked really interesting. See, Facebook is good for some things. And to my surprise and delight, she agreed to do an interview with me, even though I had not yet launched the podcast and she had no idea who on earth I was. Thanks for taking a leap of faith, Nikki. Since that time in 2015, I have attended many of her About Women events, spoken at least 4 of them, used her question of the day in her Facebook group as a journal self-study prompt. I have no idea how often. Have marched for women's solidarity in Washington, D.C. with her, and I'm sure in another 2 years' time, I will be able to add many more connections and interactions with Nikki to this list. I want to say that this is the power of podcasting, the potential of social media, to create community in new and unexpected ways with people you might not have otherwise met. And this is what the Creative Impostor has been becoming. I want to extend this same opportunity to you. So, listen to Nikki's story about how she has started so many things, including About Women, by concentrating on the what rather than the how, which is totally the inspiration for step 1 of the How to Start Anything audio course. Then, get the course. Listen to step 1, make a big old list of everything you want to do or create in work and in life, and then share it with us in the Creative Impostor Facebook group. And who knows what new connections, collaborations, business, and creative works will come to be as a result. We begin this interview by discussing what Nikki does in her, quote, real job as a women's empowerment coach. And yes, she does get paid for this. You'll see what I mean later in the conversation. Here's Nikki from 2015.
In a nutshell, like if I had to say one sentence of what that means, I help women own their shit. I help women get their shit together. I think a lot of us feel that we don't have choices. I feel a lot of us think that we're just kind of out there. And I think sometimes we think that things happen to us instead of us making things happen. And I mean, I'm guilty of it as well. You know, I mean, I moved to San Francisco not really knowing what was going to happen. And it was like, oh, I can't wait to find out what life is going to be around me instead of me figuring out my life around the city. I want to hold women's hands and I want to tell them that it's okay. I guess it's something that I've always wanted. And not that I didn't have strong women in my life. My mom is probably the strongest woman I know. So it's not like I didn't have that around me, but it's different when you're on your own, because now I'm in San Francisco and now I'm in New York, and I want to give women a centralized place to go to feel better about themselves.
How did you come across this container for the work that you wanted to do of becoming a coach?
I guess it's something that I've always done, and I just didn't get paid for it. You know, I felt that I was sort of the go-to person to help friends be accountable. The public speaking coaching, that kind of came out of left field. I never planned on that. I remember when I went back to college in 2008, I was 34. And my very, very, very first class was a public speaking class. But I didn't know that I was taking a public speaking class because the class was called Foundations of Communication. And so I thought it was just about how we communicate, not understanding that it was how we communicate publicly. And I remember every speech that I gave, I was a wreck. I was just a bundle of nerves. I was shaking. I didn't know how to breathe. And then I just started practicing. I just started becoming more, eventually just kind of became natural to me. But it wasn't in the beginning. I think it just took a lot of practice for me to do that. And it was scary, but I just kind of kept doing it. And I thought, I want to help other women do that, because public speaking, what do they say? It's like the number one fear next to death. Like people would rather die than public speak.
Yeah, it's worse than death.
Yeah. And I get that. Trust me, I get that. Like that class that I took, oh my God, I can still think back about it and just think about how shaky I was. And so I wanted to help women share their voice. You know, it goes back to that. My voice is valid. And, you know, and public speaking isn't just speaking in front of 20 people or 50 people or 100 people. Public speaking is, me and you are public speaking right now. If you're ordering a pizza, you're public speaking. And so I wanted to help women hone their voice. I wanted to give them this permission that it was okay.
Yeah, I think that makes so much sense, because I have a background in acting and performance and singing, which I've done since I was a small child. And I never used to get nervous going on stage to play someone else. But as soon as I had to give a speech or present something as me, I suddenly would get nervous, sweaty palms, my voice would be shaky, butterflies in my stomach. But if you gave me a character or a role to play, then I was fine. What are some resources or some practices or some beliefs that you draw on to find that confidence or to help your clients find that confidence?
I think the first thing that we all forget to do, especially when we're nervous, is to breathe. I mentioned that when I took this public speaking course, I had no idea how to breathe. In fact, there was one speech in particular I remember talking so fast. I don't think I took a breath at all. And I just thought, well, if I just speak really fast, it'll just get over faster. Not realizing that my message is not going to get across because it's not just what you say, but how you say it. I realized that breathing is really important. And I remember coaching somebody once. We weren't even talking about public speaking, but we were just like talking about kind of being present. And I said, let's talk about breathing. So I'm going to teach you how to breathe. And she was like, she got really upset with me and she was like, I know how to breathe. And I said, yeah, I understand that you're alive. I understand that you're breathing and that you are clearly not dead. But if you are reacting to me in that way, I don't think you are breathing. And so I think maybe my version of breathing is another person's version of being present or being aware. But I think that if you are aware of your breath, then it will help slow you down. And another thing that I talk about too is recognizing when to have pauses.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. That's okay if you slow down, and that's okay that you think about it. And a lot of people think, oh, I can't have any dead air. I can't have any blank space, because then people are going to stop paying attention. And I promise you, our attention spans are short, but they're going to not pay attention to you because you stop talking for 2 seconds. And for some people, 2 seconds seems like it's forever, but to your audience, it's not, because they're processing your words and they're processing what you have to say. So I think that's a big ritual of mine, is slowing down. And if I'm facilitating, if I'm public speaking, but it's not just a monologue, that I want reaction from the audience, if I want them to talk back, if I want them to react, that I have to listen to them. Let's say I ask a question to my audience and then they say something. I want to be able to listen to that, but then also maybe bounce an idea from that to everyone else. I'm not just asking and then not listening.
I heard an interview recently, and I wish I could remember who it was with, but he was talking about our education system and our society, and how there's a strong emphasis on teaching reading and writing skills, but there's so much less emphasis on speaking and listening skills, and even less on listening than on speaking. And I think that that is key in terms of finding your authenticity as a presenter and as a facilitator, so that you're really creating that dialogue, as you said, back and forth between your audience and your presenters. And that's the key of being present. You know, if you're listening, you have to be present. And if you're present, you have to be listening. There's no other choice.
Exactly. And it comes back to that being authentic and being genuine, because no one wants to hang out with a liar. No one wants to, well, at least I don't think that they do. I would hope that they don't. But people want to know that they're heard. Mm-hmm. And if I'm not authentic about it, and if I'm not genuine about it, then it doesn't matter, because I've just been lying the whole time. And that's not the message that I want to get across.
Let's talk about women.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
So what is it?
So what is About Women? About Women is a centralized place for women to go to talk about matters that matter to them. My husband and I met when we were both 32. And he had, at the time, his son was 5 years old. And I'd never met anybody with a son. And I'd never really dated too many people. I dated loosely, but I never dated anybody. And so when you meet somebody at 32, you have these discussions that you don't normally have, like if you're dating somebody at 22. So we'd always kind of had on the table, like, do we have kids? Do we not have kids? Because, like I said, we were both 32. And then at 34, I went back to school, and his son doesn't live with us. His son lives in the suburbs with his mom. And so Chad and I, every so often, every couple months, every year, whatever, we would have these discussions about, do we have kids? Do we not have kids? And we always kind of kept that door ajar. And I'd like to point out that in my 20s, I think I always thought I was going to have kids. I often thought that in my 30s, like, when I'm a millionaire and I solve the world's problems, that, then I will have children. And then, you hit 30 and it's different than what you think. And, and then you're 35. And I always thought I was going to have children. And then when Chad and I started talking, it was like, well, I don't know. And so besides Chad and I talking, I started talking to other women. I started to loosely interview all these other women in all different ages, all different sizes, all different backgrounds, some with children, some without, all of these women that I would interview. And I started to hear all of these stories. I mean, all of these stories. And I thought, oh my goodness, how come these stories are not being told? And at the time, I didn't really think about it. I thought they were fascinating, but I didn't really know what to do with those stories. I just kept thinking, well, I can ask these women questions because I'm pretty extroverted and I just have the ability to do that. But how many women don't ask these questions? How many women just sit idly by and just go, well, society tells me I should have kids, so I'm going to have kids. And so from there, because I have kept hearing all these amazing stories, that's where About Women came from. Was I had been to a bunch of storytelling events in Chicago, because Chicago is famous for all these storytelling events. And I thought, why don't I create one specifically for women? And we can talk about these things that are already being talked about. These topics, these whether it's having kids or whether it's confidence or whether it's what do you do at a job interview or whatever, are already being discussed. They're being discussed at book clubs, and they're being discussed when you're hanging out with your, with your lady friends, drinking wine. They're being discussed, maybe on the soccer field as your kids are playing soccer. Like, they're being discussed all the time. There just was no platform for it. At least I didn't know where there was a platform for it. And I thought, let me give it a platform. So I had no idea how to do that. So I just kept asking questions. And I knew a friend of mine runs storytelling events here in Chicago, Scott Whitehair. And I sat down with him and I said, hey, I've got a bunch of questions for you. I said, can you help me out? He's like, yeah. He's like, I'd love to help you out. And he loved the idea. And he was the one that helped me kind of give it a home. It's been just over a year I've been doing this. It's been 13 months. And for the most part, it's the same from the very beginning. The only thing that's really different so much is the conversation piece of the events. I often call it's conversation, presentation, and inspiration. The conversation piece gets bigger and bigger every time because I want to make sure that the audience has a chance to feel that their voice is valid, because maybe they don't want to get up in front of somebody and talk for 12 minutes, but maybe they're comfortable with sitting in the audience and voicing their point of view. So About Women came about because I was searching to find what other women were doing about having babies or not having babies.
Yeah, what I love about the way that you're going about this is, as you say, there are topics that are important and they're pervasive in society. I mean, besides the whether to have babies or not have babies, you're addressing body image and self-esteem. You're addressing topics related to personal things, relationship choices, relationships, family dynamics, and professional concerns about feeling authentic or about finding your niche, or, things that can be potentially very personal, and things that I think, though they are being discussed here and there, there's a lot of times they almost feel like taboo topics. Like, you want to say what you think, but you're not really sure how it's going to come across. If, I'm 36 and I say, yeah, I don't think I'm going to have babies. And I think it's good that you are creating this open discussion in a place that feels very safe and that feels like it's not slanted. It's not like all the single 30-something-year-olds who are like, oh, no, I'm not having babies, and are complaining about people who are having babies, or all the people having babies saying, what's wrong with my friend who's 36 and not having babies?
Right.
It's a very open dialogue and discussion for things that I think sometimes, you're right, people don't always feel comfortable and confident saying, having their voice be heard and being able to say, where they're coming from.
Right. It was really important to me when I created this, that it was a safe place, it's a safe space, and that there's, no matter what the topic, there's no wrong answer. Regardless if the topic is, to have kids or not to have kids, or if it's about confidence, if it's about sexuality, relationships, that there is no wrong answer. The right answer is your answer. And it was really important to me to have sympathy and empathy involved in, in the discussions, because it goes back to that listening that we were talking about earlier, that it's not just listening with your ears, but listening with your heart, and realizing that, hey, this might be good for me, or what I'm going to do, but that somebody might not work for somebody else. And I remember last summer, I was talking to a random woman that I barely know, and she, she was just asking about me, she's making conversation, and she's like, so tell me what your real job is. And I couldn't help but, wonder, like, what do you mean real job? And she kept saying, like, one that you get paid for. And I was like, yeah, I do get paid for this job. And then it, the conversation continued, and I was talking about, because I was in the process of moving, and saying I was at my previous place for 9 years. I was renting, and the owners are selling the building. And she said, oh, what a waste of money to rent all those years. And she didn't know she was saying anything wrong. She really didn't. To give her the benefit of the doubt, she had no idea that she was saying anything wrong. And then the next thing was, oh, do you and your husband have kids? And I said, no. I said, we decided not to. And she looks at me with her head kind of cocked to the side and was like, it's never too late. And I barely knew this woman. And in a matter of 5 minutes, I was judged on my job being real or not being real. I was judged on that I was renting instead of owning. And I was judged on that I didn't have children. You know, she didn't know, what if I had a background of I had 10 miscarriages or even one miscarriage? What if I tried and I couldn't and I'm infertile and now I'm like, she had no idea what any of my story was. And to be fair, she didn't know that she was judging me. She was putting her values on me. And I'm not saying it's right, but she was unaware. And that part of that really bothered me. And my events I had only had like 2 events at the time about women. The events itself were only about 2 months old. But I thought, I don't want that. The whole idea is that, you know, we don't all live in the same colored house. Mm-hmm. You know, we don't all eat the same food. We don't all have the same jobs because we all like different things. And why can't we accept each other for that? But we get very caught up with, well, if I have kids, then you must have kids. Or, you know, if this is my job, then you should have this job. Or this song is amazing. You need to love this song just as much as I love this song. And it's maybe, but maybe not. And if it's maybe not, that's still okay. And so that's the big message too that I want to get across with my events is that, you know, they are completely, I want you to drop your judgment at the door. I want this to be a judgment-free conversation. And I know that is very difficult, but we have to try because we have to recognize that my way is not just the only way.
So the name of this podcast is The Creative Impostor. And I launched it because I wanted to talk about this thing called imposter syndrome that seems to be one of those almost taboo topics that we all kind of know it's there, but maybe we don't know what it's called, or it's that feeling of self-doubt or that voice in your head, which may take the form of your own voice or may take the form of an outside critic's voice, you know, something someone said to you innocently or not thinking that felt like a personal attack on a value or called into question a choice that you had made or a value that you held or something that you were doing or putting your effort to, you know, having somebody say, you know, here's this thing that you've worked hard to create and put out there into the world, and somebody to say, oh, well, that's very nice, but what's your real job? You know, kind of, even if you're a confident person and you believe in what you're doing, kind of stings a little bit.
Just a little. Yeah, just a little. Yeah.
So what do you do when this voice comes up? Well, first of all, does this voice come up for you ever when you're working on creating something or thinking about a topic that you want to address or explore? And what do you do when you hear it?
I love the question. First of all, does the voice come up? Does the imposter voice come up? All the time. All the time. All the time. My husband told me about the imposter syndrome probably about a year ago. And I didn't even know it had a name. I didn't know that it was a real thing. And then all of a sudden I see there's a Wikipedia page on it and there's websites and there's books written about it. And I'm finding that a lot of women don't know that there's a name for it. I mean, and I just found out about it a year ago, but it makes sense because it's this feeling of that, is my success real? You know, when am I going to be found out? When is somebody going to tap me on the shoulder and say, you don't belong here? I just saw an interview with David Letterman because last week was his final week. And he said, I don't know for how long, but he said that he's always waiting to get the tap on the shoulder that says, the funny guy is now here, you can go. And I'm in the process, I'm in the middle of reading Yes, Please by Amy Poehler. Mm-hmm. And there's a section where she talks about when her and Tina Fey were doing Weekend Update on Saturday Night Live, right before they went on air, at least that's how I remember it, at least right before they went on air, they would look at each other and say, we fooled everybody. We sure fooled them, you know, thinking like, oh, I don't belong here. And I get that all the time. I get that all the time. I feel that way all the time. And I don't know if it's ever going to go away. And sometimes there's a part of me that hopes it doesn't, because maybe that keeps me humble. Maybe that keeps me aware of my surroundings and I'm not invincible. You know, I can remember I was doing a talk at IIT a couple months ago for a women's engineering group. And I was going down to IIT to look at the space. So this was like a couple months before the actual event. I went down there to go meet the young women that had contacted me and look at the space and see my surroundings. So I'm comfortable with it. And I remember driving on Lakeshore Drive. It was like a beautiful day. It was still like winter, but it was kind of spring and it was just that beautiful day. And I was on Lakeshore Drive and traffic was quite lovely that day on a Friday afternoon. And I remember thinking like, wow, like this feels really good. You know, somebody wants to hire me to, to speak at a women's, engineering banquet. And I thought, this is really cool. And I remember feeling really confident about myself. And then I get there and I was only down there. I only needed to be down there for about 20 minutes, looked at the space, met the young women, the young engineers, and cool, we'll be in touch, send me your bio, all that stuff. And I remember getting in the car and driving back up north on Lakeshore Drive and having an anxiety attack and start crying. It came out of nowhere, like most anxiety attacks do. I mean, I wasn't prepared for it. And it was scary because it was like, oh, who am I? Who am I to do this? Like, why am I the person that they ask? There's a million other women that they could have asked. But I cry and I process it and I get it out and I keep putting one foot in front of the other. And I don't know, logic always brings me back home. My emotions sometimes they get the best of me at times, and I've got to process those emotions. But it always comes back to logic where I'm like, well, they asked me. This is the inertia I'm taking. This is body in motion stays in motion. So I'm just going to continue in this motion. So it's scary and I get it all the time, but I'm also a human being.
Yeah. Allowing the emotions to come out and process, but then coming back to the logical side of now here's how I'm going to put one foot in front of the other. I remember a coach that I had, a sales coach that I had once said, when something goes wrong and you feel like everything is against you, you get 5 minutes to cry it out to me. And then we're going to spend 25 minutes making a plan of what you're going to do.
It's a great idea.
It's like, thank you for giving me that 5 minutes. And thank you for putting a limit on it, because then otherwise it can extend into some hysterical, thing, which isn't really helpful to anyone.
I cry over everything. I cry if I'm happy. I cry if I'm sad. I cry if I'm frustrated. I cry if I'm angry. I cry when I doubt myself. I'm just a crier. And it's not about being like, oh, I shouldn't cry. Like, no, like I'm just going to own my crying. I'm just going to cry and I'm going to get it out. Or as my mother would say, you got to get out the poisons, right? You got to get all that out. And now what? I always think that like, okay, I'm mad or I'm frustrated or whatever, but now what? What's the next step? Am I going to cry forever? Probably not. I'm going to run out of tears eventually and I'm going to get exhausted. But how can I move on from this? And that's that phrase, that now what? Now what?
Mm-hmm. That's brilliant. So tell me, Nikki, what's challenging you most in your business right now?
What's challenging? I don't know. I mean, isn't that the classic answer of, there's not enough hours in the day, or, I need like 10 assistants, or that I try not, as much as there's challenges out there, I try not to be like, oh, I'm so challenged by this right now, because anything that I'm challenged by, I ask for help. I have no idea how to do a lot of things. My events, I don't put my events on by myself. I have my friend Ellie, who is fantastic, helps me greet the women at the door. And if she can't do it, my friend Kara does it. And I always have people on camera. My friend Carrie runs the camera. My friend Barbara runs the camera sometimes. I kind of have been, I don't know if the word is outsourcing, but I've been asking for help because I'm not an island and I don't live on an island and I can't do all of it by myself. I guess right now I'm trying not to look at it as a challenge, because if it's a challenge, then I just ask for help.
I think that's so important for people to hear, because I know I should have heard that many years ago in my entrepreneurial path. You get this idea in your mind that you need to know how to do everything. You need to be the idea person. You need to be the accountant. You need to be the marketing person. You need to be the customer service person. It's like ridiculous. Nobody needs to do all that.
No. And I definitely do a lot, but I can't do it all. Mm-hmm. And I certainly can't do it all at the same time. But yeah, I just ask for help. I don't know. I don't know if we're not raised to do that. We live in America where you have to do things on your own and you got to take care of yourself, but it takes a village.
Mm-hmm. So what's the best way for our listeners to connect with you, to find out more about your coaching services, more about women?
The best way, my website, NikkiNigl.com, which I'm sure you will have
in the show notes.
In the show notes, yes, because you're good like that. But Nikki Nigl, and I always want to remind people that my name is Nigl. It rhymes with eagle or regal, however you'd like to rhyme it out.
Or a regal eagle.
Regal eagle, yes, regal eagle Nigl. I often think that if I my parents own a bar, but if I ever owned a bar, that I would call it the Regal Meagle to be a throwback to the Regal Beagle from Three's Company.
I love it.
But the best way to get in touch with me is my website, NikkiNigl.com. I'm on Facebook, and I even have a Facebook group. So if you want to join the conversation, it's Nikki Nigl's About Women.
Awesome. One last question for you. If someone is listening to this podcast right now and she's dying to do something creative, she has got a brilliant idea, or maybe even just the beginning seeds of an idea, and wants to put it out there, but is struggling because she feels insecure or unsure, or maybe she's not the best person to put this out there, or maybe nobody's going to want to hear it or participate in it. What one guiding bit of wisdom or advice would you have for our listener?
I was given this advice from my husband, and I kind of ignored it. And then like a week later, I got the same advice from a good friend of mine. And I thought, wow, that's amazing advice, even though my husband said it. But I didn't think it was bad advice, because my husband processes things very differently than I do. And the advice that I was given is, don't worry about the how, concentrate on the what. I had to think about that. What does that mean? Don't worry about the how, concentrate on the what. And I'm a structure kind of gal. I worry about structure as opposed to content. I'm all about like, how do we put this together? How are we getting there? Not so much what are our plans when we get there, but how are we getting there? And so I get really caught up with, okay, so I want to be a women's empowerment coach, or I want to work with women. I don't think I had the name quite yet, the title just yet, but I want to work with women. But how am I going to do that? How am I going to work with women? And so when my husband and my very dear friend, Kelly Standing, said to me, don't worry about the how, concentrate on the what, I started making a list of all the things that I wanted, and I didn't worry about time or money or the how component. I just concentrated on the what. I just concentrated on, what do I want? So I want to collaborate with women. I want women to own their shit. I want women, X, Y, Z. And I started making this huge list, and I put it in a Google Doc so I would never lose it, and I had access to it. And the list kept getting longer and longer. And some days I would just put one word in there, I'd maybe empower, or maybe strength or something. And the list kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, because I stopped realizing a long time ago, I'm not going to just remember all of this. We have this illusion that I'm just going to remember everything. No, it's not going to happen. And so that would be my advice, is don't worry about the how, concentrate on that what, because of that list, because of that gigantic list that started from one word, I have my own business. And it's scary. It really is. But the how will come. The how will happen. But you got to figure out what you want first.
Isn't Nikki awesome? The good news is, if you identify as a woman, you can get even more Nikki Nigl by joining her About Women Facebook group, linked in the show notes by tapping the show artwork on your phone and at thecreativeimpostor.com/038. And if you are in the Chicago area, by attending her monthly About Women events in person. And even if you do not identify as a woman, Nikki hosts periodic co-ed events in Chicago, so never fear. We've got you covered. And of course, please visit thecreativimpostor.com/magic, where for a limited time, as of this episode, you can get the How to Start Anything audio course from me totally free, and join the conversation in the Creative Impostor Facebook group. Even if you are hearing this many months into the future and the course is no longer available, something else magical will be waiting for you at the same URL. So check it out. This episode was mixed by Edwin Ruiz of Mondo Machine. Our theme music is by Jovia Armstrong. I thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a week filled with visions of what dancing in your head and making their way to your soon-to-be giant lips.